my pleasure now to bring us to the second panel presentation of this conference, which now gives us a chance to move to more concrete examinations of Russian power practices in the MENA region and the Black Sea region. My name is Matthew Blackburn. I'm a senior researcher at NUPI, and it's a pleasure to also get a chance to engage with Jakob's project, which is coming along very nicely. We have three speakers, all of them focusing on different elements of Russian power practices and their reception. Virginie Colombier is based in Luis University in Rome and works on the Mediterranean platform. Her paper is on Russian soft power practices in the MENA region. My colleague Tina Gade is also at NUPI, and she's doing the reception of Russian policy in the case of Saudi Arabia. And the third speaker is Christian Otlund from FFI, which is the Norwegian Research Defense Establishment. Thank you for saving me there, Jakob. And he is looking at Russian power practices in the Black Sea region from 2014 to 2025. So, a chance to look more concretely at these diverse regions. And without further ado, I will give the floor to Virginia. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Matthew, for the introduction. Thank you, Jakob, and NUPI for the kind invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here, even though I must start with a disclaimer, because I'm not a Russia expert at all. On the contrary, I've been asked to come in and try to provide some of the insights and inputs that we could feed into your work on Russia's practices in the MENA region. I've been working with colleagues from the MENA region, essentially looking at how Russia seemed to be increasing its influence in the Middle East and North Africa and the broader Mediterranean region, and in particular in the wake of the attack against Russia in 2022. So we were wondering how come this is happening, and what are more precisely the soft power tools that Russia has been deploying to complement the hard power that has been its main tool of power projection in the region and, of course, beyond. So we started working with a small group of researchers with expertise in the region. The focus was on soft power strategies, and we focused in particular on a few case studies that we thought were of particular relevance to our analysis. We worked on Syria, Libya, Mali, and Algeria, with the idea of trying to really look at the practices that Russia has used and mobilized to expand its influence in the region, but also in some of the cases focused more on how this growing influence and these practices were being received and perceived by local populations and also local regimes. In a nutshell, because we've been asked to be very short, so it's going to be kind of a snapshot of our main conclusions. I think the important points are that we see that Russia in the MENA region has been using a very kind of mix, a blending of use of strategic narratives, also information warfare, which has been a very important tool, and overall a number of hybrid tools that have been used to expand its influence across the region. The important aspect, though, is that we conclude that this soft power strategy is not really separable from the hard power dimension of it. So we could say it's like really clearly a soft power which remains and has remained anchored very deeply in the hard power strategies that have been like the more traditional tools of action, or the repertoires of actions of Russia. This has been in particular done through private military companies that already have been addressed this morning, and in particular the Wagner Group, which has been used as one of the key vehicles of this hybrid strategy, which has been clearly implemented in the region as the kind of concrete translation of the doctrine elaborated by people like Gerasimov within the Russian establishment. So what kind of conclusions can we draw from the research? First, as I said, I think the hybrid strategy is really combined with hard power. Again, because of the geopolitical environment in which, and the changing geopolitical environment in which Russia has operated, the PMCs, Wagner first, and now in another dimension, and probably as a limiting factor, the Africa Corps. So military assets have constituted and remain, I think, central to the influence efforts of Russia in the region. They are very useful because they can demonstrate Russia's capability. They can provide security services, in particular to incumbent regimes and the people in the position of authority that they're here to defend and protect. And they also help reinforcing Russia's image as a loyal partner, a partner in which you can really, not depend, but at least trust, which I think is very important and leads us to another aspect of Russia's strategy, which is very much linked to the issue of the narratives and also information dominance. Which we've seen very strongly in the Syria case, but also in Mali and in a different way in Libya. How does has this translated into the reality? Through, of course, the use of state media, but most importantly, sending war correspondents, in particular in war areas where access has been very difficult, like Syria, for instance, where access to other reporters and journalists was very much limited. And Russia, in contrast, had the capacity to send people there and to use also a kind of ecosystem of local informants and local, I would say, influencers that they used to support their own information war. This has been very important. These online ecosystems have also been, to a large extent, controlled and managed by the Wagner Group. And it has been very important because it's been one of the ways to, I would say, reinforce and push a certain image of Russia, the one I was mentioning in the first point, but also to try and erode the Western narrative. And these two elements, reinforcing Russia's image, eroding the Western image and narrative, has been very central. And on this, I mean, there are a number of interesting studies related to the use of the internet, local medias, etc. Another aspect which has to be emphasized is how, and this has been already addressed earlier this morning, Russia has also used very strongly the anti-colonial positioning. And this is also part of the new strategies employed by Russia as a way to distantiate itself and position itself in contrast to the West, and really playing with this idea of Russia as the leader of a new world majority, which would be like the Russian wording of the global South, framing Western actors as colonial or neo-colonial powers, also very strongly having played a very important destabilizing role in the region. And here the reference to Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya has been very central, and to a large extent has helped Russia disseminate this narrative, which for this reason has been quite positively received in a number of countries of the region, not only by the regimes, those who were contested and were struggling to maintain their positions, but also by the populations. This is clearly the case in the Sahel, in Africa, but I would say in the broader MENA region too. I think these are like the key elements of the soft power instruments used by Russia in the region. When we look more specifically at Libya, and this makes sense because Libya has become, in the past years, a kind of a key platform for Russia to project its power into North Africa, but also more broadly into the Sahel and Africa. So Libya is really seen as a kind of springboard from which Russia can then deploy further into the far abroad that you were mentioning this morning. First element, which is very important, and that is kind of a basic recipe for Russian influence, exploiting fragmentation and crisis and conflict. Russia has been very good at positioning itself in areas, regions, countries that have undergone civil conflict because the divisions and the fragmentation provide a more fertile ground. The other point is like strategic patience, I would say. Not necessarily rushing with the idea, well, this is our strategy, we're going to go there and we go. No, trying to look at the situation, how the situation has evolved, and really being very pragmatic in this regard. So I don't think we can say there was a plan to go here or where or there, but more, okay, where in this environment we will have the best chance to succeed. So it's a kind of combination of strategic patience and very strong political opportunism. And in Libya, this is very well shown by the fact that until 2014, basically Russia's penetration remained quite limited, but it's the second civil war in 2014 that provided an opportunity for Russia to really step in, start providing support to the strong man of the East, Khalifa Haftar, start providing military support, sending gradually the Wagner Group, and then deploying all the other instruments which are more like traditional to Russia's influence strategy. And this has been accompanied in the Libyan case by two aspects of the economic penetration. First, the military presence had made it possible for Russia to control a number of strategic infrastructure, in particular like military bases and oil infrastructure, but also smuggling routes, which has become increasingly important. The conclusion, I think, that we could draw is that in Libya and in the MENA region, yes, Russia has really deployed what they present as this new form of hybrid strategy to expand its influence, but not soft in the classic sense. It's remained really a model which is anchored in hard power, where military deployment, but also the coercive leverage that we've discussed earlier, enabled to amplify the narrative and shape the local politics and challenge the Western influence. And I think we can discuss it later. This strategy that seemed like very successful at the beginning of 2024, in my opinion, is starting to be increasingly challenged, and we see that the emergence of other non-Western actors in the region is creating a serious challenge for Russia to use the kind of tools that it had been mobilizing since 2022. Thank you.
Thanks to Jakob, Bendik and Kun for organizing this, and to Matthew for chairing. I'll first speak about the bilateral Russian-Saudi relationship, and secondly on geopolitics. And I'll show that the relationship between these two oil producers is actually based on both competition and prospects of cooperation, though Russia and Saudi Arabia is a case of the limits of Russian influence, I would argue, in the Middle East, because there is little economic potential on the one hand, because the economies are not complementary, and secondly, because of the Saudi alliance, strategic alliance with the US for more than 80 years, in which Saudi Arabia has provided oil in exchange for US security. So let's first turn to the bilateral relationship. The relationship has actually improved in the last 5 years because Saudi foreign policy has become more ambitious due to the domestic Saudi reforms, Vision 2030, aiming to diversify the economy and create needed jobs, which is actually existential to the Saudi economy. And this has created a new foreign policy repertoire in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia first, diversifying alliances with Russia, China, BRICS, Latin America and India, and make sure actually that the US will never take Saudi Arabia for granted again, ever again. And this of course creates opportunities for Russia, which is of course increasingly isolated globally since the Ukraine war, and is seeking to develop stronger alliances with Arab states. First, with regards to Ukraine, Saudi Arabia has taken a neutral position. So it has voted in favor of UN resolutions to condemn the Russian invasion, but it didn't join the Western sanctions. It did host President Zelensky at the Arab League summit in Saudi Arabia, but it is more aiming to take a role as a mediator, facilitating peace talks between the Russians and Ukraine. And this is, on the one hand, because of public opinion, because for Saudi Arabia and for the Arab world, Gaza is what matters. Ukraine is seen as very far away as a European issue. And also Saudi Arabia must balance its relations with the West and the US on the one hand, and China on the other, China being Saudi Arabia's main trading partner. And this has been the case for 12 years now. So moving on, concurrently with the Ukraine war, Saudi Arabia has developed its energy partnership with Russia within OPEC+. OPEC+ was created in 2016 and includes 10 non-OPEC countries and in addition to the 12 OPEC countries. And the important thing is that Russia and Saudi Arabia are the two key actors here. So they have been coordinating oil policies together, especially in 2022 and 23 when they agreed on production cuts that increased oil prices, and President Biden even tried to travel to Riyadh to convince the Saudis to increase production, and he failed. But it's important to add that, of course, the oil price has gone down, and Russia and Saudi Arabia are actually not always aligned in OPEC+ either, because Russia wants volume, whereas Saudi Arabia wants the price. So there have been tensions between them, and there's also competition over Asian oil markets. So moving on, Saudi is diversifying alliances. It joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in 23 as a dialogue partner, and it has now been staying more than 2 years on the fence with regards to BRICS. It has been invited, but it never accepted the invitation. Though if you go on the webpage of BRICS, you see the Saudi flag, and actually Saudi Arabia's Deputy Foreign Minister attended the last meeting in April in Brazil. So it's reaping the benefits of staying on the fence as long as it can. But when I spoke with Saudis in Riyadh last year, they say they really don't see Saudi joining because the costs are much higher than the benefits. And Saudi Arabia just would like to use this as a leverage ploy to get a defense treaty with the US. So Saudi and Russian economic relations are limited outside of oil, and this is simply because they don't have complementary economies. We do see Russian investments in the Gulf growing, but this is mostly in the UAE and in Dubai. Moving on to the geopolitical landscape, I would like now to use the rest of the time to see how relations to third countries complicate the bilateral relationship between Saudi and Russia. First of all, the US. The US is the primary strategic partner of Saudi Arabia. And I'm sure you saw yesterday that, of course, MBS, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, is in Washington, D.C. And during this trip, Saudi Arabia was awarded the status of major non-NATO ally of the US. And they engaged in a lot of bilateral agreements on military, economic, tech cooperation, though there were no security guarantees awarded Saudi Arabia, which is what MBS wanted. But they got a lot of 48, I think, F-35 airplanes. So the strategic partner is the US still, and definitely now with Trump. Iran is also complicating the Russian-Saudi relationship because of the growing military interdependence between Iran and Russia. And we spoke about nuclear this morning. And for Saudi Arabia, I think it's important to state that despite, of course, there was a normalization agreement that was signed between Iran and Saudi in 2023, but structurally, Iran is still a rival of Saudi Arabia. They're not allies at all. And this is deep-rooted. The biggest threat to Saudi Arabia is not a full-scale invasion of Saudi Arabia, which is unrealistic. It is some missile or drone attacks on oil facilities in Saudi that might emanate, for example, from Iran or from the Houthis, similar to what happened in 2019. And the prospects of a nuclear Iran is very threatening to Saudi Arabia. Other countries, though, might ease the relationship between Russia and Saudi. This includes China, which is, as mentioned, the main trading partner of Saudi Arabia, and which brokered the normalization agreement signed back in 2023 that I mentioned. Israel and the Gaza war has also, I mean, Russia and Saudi Arabia are also somehow, in some aspects, aligned, though it's more nuanced, but they both support the two-state solution. They have both seen 7 October as a turning point because of the Israeli wars on Gaza and Lebanon and Iran. Saudi and Russia have both become more critical towards Israel, though they are not aligned on Hamas, because Russia continues to meet with Hamas, and Saudi sees Hamas as a terrorist organization. And for Saudi Arabia, there can be no normalization with Israel unless there is a clear path towards a Palestinian state. So to conclude, the prospects for cooperation are mostly oil, mediation over Ukraine, BRICS, China, and Gaza, Israel, whereas the prospects for tension include Saudi Arabia's strategic alliance with the US and the military dependence of Russia on Iran. And they also have been on opposite sides in the Syrian war. We'll see what happens there. Now, with Shara. Finally, the depth of the bilateral relations is uncertain, just because they don't have very strong economic relations, and because of the different alignment with the United States. So to conclude, Riyadh seems to deepen its ties with Russia as a leverage ploy vis-à-vis the US, wanting to extend security guarantees. And Saudi Arabia remains the key strategic, continues to see US as its key strategic partner. As for Russia, it is perhaps a bit ambitious for Russia to wish to maintain excellent relations with Israel, Iran, Saudi Arabia, all at the same time. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Building on the previous presentations, I will talk a little bit about what I perceive to be Russia's power practices in the Black Sea region. Russia has traditionally viewed the Black Sea not only as a protective buffer zone, but also as the launch pad for expansionist policies and the projection of power into the East Mediterranean, the Middle East, and North Africa. In that sense, the security dynamics in the Black Sea are in various ways intertwined with those of the MENA region, which Virginie and Tina just talked about. Before I say more about Russia's strategic objectives in the Black Sea region, the country's actions to pursue them, and the extent to which Russia's actions have succeeded or failed, I would just first like to provide some context about the Black Sea region as a geopolitical arena. To start with the basics, the Black Sea is an oval-shaped inland sea located at the crossroads between Europe and Asia. In the southwest, it is connected to the Mediterranean Sea via the Bosporus Strait, the Sea of Marmara, and the Dardanelles Passage, which are controlled by Turkey, or now Turkey. In the northeast, it is connected to the Sea of Azov through the Kerch Strait. The Black Sea is surrounded by 6 coastal states. We have Ukraine in the north, we have Russia in the northwest, the northeast, we have Georgia in the east, and we have Romania and Bulgaria in the west. 3 of these 6 coastal states are members of NATO: Romania, Bulgaria, and Turkey. Russia, for its part, has consistently adopted a antagonistic posture towards NATO, whereas 2 others, Ukraine and Georgia, have openly expressed their ambition to join the alliance. At present, however, there is much uncertainty surrounding when or even whether either of the 2 will be able to meet the criteria for full accession to NATO. The fact that Russia still occupies approximately 20% of the land territory of both Ukraine and Georgia further complicates their NATO aspirations. In the slightly less than 12 years that have passed since Russia's illegal occupation and annexation of Crimea in 2014, Moscow's approach to the Black Sea region has reflected what I would call a revisionist agenda, aimed at replacing the previous regional order with a new order defined and enforced by Russia. It should be noted here that Russia's revisionism and territorial expansionism in the Black Sea region started well before the annexation of Crimea. Following the Russia-Georgia War of 2008, Moscow established military control over the provinces of South Ossetia and Abkhazia, the latter of which has a significant Black Sea coastline. Soon after, in 2009, Russia deployed elements of its Black Sea fleet to Abkhazian ports, particularly Ochamchire, which is shown on this slide, and started upgrading the facility there to accommodate Russian naval and coast guard vessels. Since then, Russia has exercised coastal state jurisdiction in what is legally Georgia's territorial waters and economic zone in the eastern part of the Black Sea. A similar pattern of creeping jurisdiction emerged on a much larger scale in the northern part of the Black Sea after Russia's occupation of the Crimean Peninsula. Russia's unilateral land grab in 2014 implied that the country's Black Sea coastline de facto tripled in length. Russia also took control of most of the maritime zone that surrounds Crimea, leaving Ukraine with only a fraction of its former EEZ in the northwestern corner of the Black Sea. This situation further deteriorated in the early stages of Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022, when Russia seized the northern coast of the Sea of Azov and the Ukrainian ports of Mariupol and Berdyansk. By the spring of 2022, Ukraine had lost control over more than 80% of its pre-war coastline, 70% of its exclusive economic zone, and several ports of critical importance to its economy and security. Russia's ambition at this point was to cripple the Ukrainian economy by cutting off its access to global markets. Initially, the UN and Turkey brokered the so-called Black Sea Grain Initiative in July 2022, which allowed for grain exports from Ukrainian ports via the Turkish straits. Russia, however, repeatedly tried to use this agreement as leverage, and having withdrawn from the agreement altogether in 2023, Russia again attempted to impose a maritime blockade on Ukraine by deploying naval forces to key strategic points. So what does all of this tell us about Russia's power repertoire? For starters, I would say that Russia's quest for regional dominance in the Black Sea region has been and remains a multi-layered endeavor. Russia has used a wide range of tools and instruments to achieve its strategic objectives in the region. Militarily, the Russian annexation of Crimea turned the peninsula into a heavily fortified stronghold, equipped with long-range air defense systems, coastal missile batteries, and upgraded naval forces. This allowed Moscow to assert control, at least temporarily, over the adjacent maritime areas, impose a maritime blockade on Ukraine, and project power in and beyond the region. In the economic sphere, Russia weaponized trade flows in an effort to marginalize neighboring states and advance its regional ambitions. It implemented costly infrastructure projects, most notably the Kerch Strait Bridge. It also disrupted Ukrainian grain exports and leveraged maritime control to shape global markets and reinforce its economic interests. Sanction evasion schemes have been integral to this strategy. A key element in this is, of course, the increasingly large shadow fleet of aging tankers and cargo vessels, which operate in this and other regions, usually under murky ownership structures. Informational tools have also been central. Russia has conducted systematic disinformation campaigns to exploit vulnerabilities in the neighboring states and undermine NATO and EU credibility. Russia has also aggressively pushed false historical narratives to legitimize its territorial claims and erode international support for Ukraine and other Black Sea states. On the diplomatic front, Russia has repeatedly distorted and violated international law, including maritime law, while consistently pursuing a strategy of creeping jurisdiction. Russia has also sought to influence regional dynamic through selective engagements, what Derek Aver called flexible diplomatic engagement, including leveraging of the 1936 Montreux Convention and the maintenance of transactional ties with Turkey. Taken together, these instruments form a comprehensive strategy aimed at subordinating and dominating neighboring states, securing strategic depth, and using the Black Sea as a platform for broader geopolitical ambitions. In terms of results, Russia's power practices in the Black Sea region since 2014 reflect a mix of short-term successes and long-term failures. Jacob touched on this earlier. Initially, Russia was able to secure control over Crimea and expand Russia's naval presence in the Black Sea and the East Mediterranean, which was an important prerequisite for Russia's military intervention in Syria, which started in 2015. However, after the start of the full-scale invasion in 2022, it soon became clear that Russia was unable to assert uncontested dominance in the maritime domain. Ukraine adopted innovative asymmetric tactics, including naval drone and missile strikes, which inflicted significant losses on the Russian Black Sea fleet. And the sinking of the cruiser Moskva in April 2022 was an important milestone in this regard. This was the largest Russian warship to be lost in combat since World War II. Since then, close to a third of Russia's Black Sea fleet has either been sunk, destroyed, or damaged in Ukrainian attacks. And Russia has been forced to relocate its remaining naval forces from Sevastopol to Novorossiysk and even the coast of Abkhazia. And this has in turn made it possible for Ukraine to resume its seaborne trade and reopen the grain corridor through Odessa. Finally, it should be mentioned, as my co-panelists have already done, that Russia's efforts to sustain operations in Syria, Libya, and other parts of the MENA region have encountered significant difficulties in recent years. Diminished naval capacity and increasingly limited basing options have constrained the country's logistical reach and eroded its regional influence. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Those three excellently timed and fascinating presentations. I'll now invite the panelists to come and join me up at the podium, and we will open with some questions. Thank you, all three of you. So, if I could start with a question from the first presentation about Russia's role in Libya, in Syria, Mali, Algeria. My question is really about in what ways this is not traditional soft power. You said that the balance between hard and soft power that is being used by Russia is somewhat new. It doesn't show what we might have found in the 19th century, the 20th century. So the blend is one part of the question, as opposed to them just using old-fashioned approach of trying to build credibility, trustworthiness in order to do business with different states. So I suppose when we use terms like hybrid war, information war, hybrid tools, this kind of makes it sound more, sneaky or illegitimate, or kind of using kind of special things that no one else uses. So maybe you might want to clarify that point.
No, first of all, thank you. I think there's nothing new as such in the idea of using hybrid war or warfare. And this is very much, by the way, something that Russians developed after having observed also how the US and other Western powers had behaved in the Second World War and its aftermath. So in this regard, there is not much new. What I think is quite interesting, and this is why I really try to highlight the hard power, soft power linkage, because what we've seen, and probably it echoes what some of the panelists mentioned earlier, that it's very difficult to disconnect the soft power used by Russia from its use and quite extensive use of military power and hard power. And in this regard, less that a capacity to project influence or to be like a source of emulation or a model that regimes or people in the regions in the region would follow. I think Russia has less this capacity than it's using its hard power as an enabler of soft power. So this is why the two dimensions very much linked together, and to some extent Moscow needs the hard power capacity first, of course, to demonstrate its capacity to project its influence, to be a loyal, strong partner, but also to force kind of the imposition of this narrative and the model that it's trying to project, I would say.
And this kind of, what they're trying to project is the idea that all these countries should rebalance and depend less on the West and change their course, their foreign policy course, because sometimes that's not so clear, the degree to which there is a coherent narrative they use with all these different countries.
I think it's probably less that they are telling them they should rebalance. It's more that they're using, or they're trying to play and mobilize a discourse which is already very much present in local societies, which is anti-colonial, opposed to these attempts by the West or perceived attempts by the West to exert new forms of domination, that foreign policy of the US or the West has also in many cases been perceived as disruptive, like a challenge to local order. So there is like trying to serve kind of use at its advantage a sentiment which is already very strongly present in local populations. And also, I had something else in mind which I just forgot. But I would say, yeah, and the other thing is that they're also really trying to show that in contrast to Western powers, they can support regimes, they can help restore order, restore stability, which is something that they've been very much doing both in near and the far abroad. So, and this is precisely what I believe has been seriously eroded over the past year and a half, 2 years, because of what happened in Syria, what's happening in Mali, and so on and so forth.
Thank you. Now, turning to the next presentation, which is obviously looking at Saudi Arabia, a power in its own right in the region. My question was really what your sense, Tina, of Saudi Arabia's vision for the regional security order. What role they think Russia plays or should play. You've kind of already indicated that Saudi Arabia prioritizes the relationship with America, but at the same time it's looking to diversify its relationships, economic and security relationships, including China. You didn't say anything about China, but so I'm opening up a bit of the terrain for you to respond to, but what is the threat perception at this stage in Saudi Arabia? Where do they see the main threat to their security coming from? And this is kind of the same question. And, you know, obviously we have the lesson of their military intervention in Yemen, which was not a success. And then they're watching 2 wars unfold, one in Ukraine, one in Gaza, not to mention the other military operations that Israel has conducted. So I was just curious if you might want to take that kind of broad terrain of Saudi Arabia's view of the regional security. Thank you.
I think they see the main. Thanks a lot. I think they see the main threat coming from, as mentioned, an Iranian or Houthi-led strike on their oil facilities would be the most probable scenario for a threat. Concerning. And another threat is, of course, they also see Islamism as a threat. A domestic threat as well. So, which is why they oppose the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, etc. And in terms of Gaza, they also their aim is mostly to contain the pro-Palestinian sympathies within the population in order. They still maintain the option of normalizing relations with Israel at an opportune time. They have not abandoned that idea at all.
And what do you think their view of Russia's position in the Middle East is? Because obviously Russia was involved in Syria. That has now ended with them withdrawing. They have been apparently defeated there to some extent. But I'm curious what you think the Saudi perspective is on Russia's waxing or waning power capacities in the region.
I think when I spoke with Saudi officials and Saudi social scientists last year in Riyadh, they told me that a lot of Saudis were very or that Russia now has lost a lot of power in the Middle East with the fall of the Assad regime. That also Russia lost a lot of credibility in the Arab world and in Saudi Arabia in particular because of the invasion in 2015. And they said that Russia Russia joined the war on the Assad regime, and but without having a clear plan for Syria. And they were very critical of that. And they also, one thing I didn't mention, but Virginie spoke about it, they were very, they didn't have high prospects in the idea of Russian soft power at all in Saudi Arabia. Russia doesn't really have any soft power at all. If you consider, for example, the GCC nationals, the tourism is going to Europe and the United States. Students are going to the United States. Russia is not the destination for them.
Thank you. Christiane, if I could now shift this focus to the Black Sea region, which of course is a region more crucial to Russia's project of being a great power. You mentioned at the start of your presentation that it's a buffer zone. It's also a means of projecting power. And then there was this question of revisionist agenda that Russia has in the Black Sea. I wonder if you might say a few words about 2 things then. So first revisionism and then being a regional hegemon, so to speak, or dominance. You didn't use the word hegemony, you said dominance. So on the first question about revisionism, the previous order before 2008, before there was discussion of NATO expansion into the Black Sea, into Georgia and Ukraine, From 1991 until 2008, Russia had a base in Crimea, and that was the status quo. So after 2008, NATO expansion changes the balance of power potentially in favour of the West, and Russia is waging a kind of preventative war. This is not my view, this is coming from the Russian side, that they are trying to stop that from happening. So that, in your terms, is revisionism. That's the first question. The second question is about dominance, and I wonder if you would just look at a few other regions that border Russia and say whether you think Russia is even close to being dominant there. For example, Central Asia, South Caucasus, Black Sea. From the picture you put on your last slide, it looks like Russia is barely capable of asserting its military power in the Black Sea. And therefore, this whole quest for dominance, another way it looks somewhat unconvincing and perhaps failing, which is something I think you could respond to. Thank you very much.
Yeah, two very relevant concepts, revisionism and dominance. There's a large literature on the phenomenon of revisionist states. And simply put, a revisionist state is a state whose behavior is driven by a desire to change the system that it is part of or achieve a more prominent position within that system. And revisionist states are often contrasted with status quo states. States that strive to preserve things as they are, including the system that they are a part of and their place within the system. States can be revisionists on many levels. We heard the term nuclear revisionism earlier this morning, and CRINC, that was a new concept for me, the link between China, Russia, Iran and North Korea. But here we are talking about regional revisionism. We're not talking about necessarily global revisionism, which is about how states seek to challenge the core principles, the norms and power structures of the entire international systems. We're talking about regional revisionism. In other words, the things that states do to change the status quo within a specific geographic region, in this case, the Black Sea region. And I have argued that regional security systems, such as that of the Black Sea region, may function as sort of miniature anarchies in their own right. So Russia's policy moves, in my way, or if you will, Russia's power practices in the Black Sea region have been driven by, in my view, an overarching ambition to assert regional dominance. And this ambition is reflected in a range of strategic behaviors, including military posturing, naval deployments, assertive diplomacy, and the use of hybrid warfare tactics aimed at reshaping that order, redrawing borders, and so on. With regard to the concept of dominance, I deliberately used the term regional dominance rather than regional hegemony to describe Russia's primary strategic objective in the region. And these two concepts, dominance and hegemony, are sometimes used interchangeably, but they are far from synonymous. Regional dominance implies strong influence and control over neighboring states achieved through the use of political, economic, and military means, but without necessarily ideological leadership or formal institutional authority. Regional hegemony, on the other hand, suggests a more comprehensive form of leadership, where the other actors implicitly or explicitly acknowledge and accept the hegemon's leadership role. And the latter is, in my view, increasingly unlikely scenario in the Black Sea region and Russian hegemony, given the deepening mistrust among the other Black Sea coastal states toward Russia's intentions and actions in this region.
Thank you. So just to clarify, do you think that Russia had a degree of dominance over Ukraine before 2014? something changed, or after 2008, for example. Obviously, after 1991, the two countries became independent and separate entities. But what's your view on that kind of shifting point? And when did Russia have to then reassert its dominance? And finally, does any other power in the Black Sea have an interest in Ukraine that resembles what Russia has?
Russia has traditionally been the greatest military power in this region in terms of naval assets and so on. But there are degrees of dominance, right? And Russia's policy has been aimed to sort of strengthen that position of dominance, increase control in the maritime domain. And after the start of the occupation and annexation of Crimea, Russia wanted to increase that dominance, particularly after the opening of the Kerch Strait bridge in 2018, after which Russia started to impose sort of blockade-like situation and limit the trade links between between Ukraine and the rest of the world.
Thank you. Okay, we have about 15 minutes to open for questions from the audience, and I have one at the front and then at the back with Henrik. Yeah. So Annie, you want to go first? You.
No.
Oh, that's fine.
Thanks, Matt. I'm still Henrik Seipo, Equinor. One question for Christian and then one for Professor Colombier. Christian, Russia has failed in many instances with its power repertoire and practices. But say we're in the Kremlin, say we're taking stock. Isn't Georgia now a roaring success? And how do we explain this in terms of repertoire and practices? And Professor Colombier, you made a couple of references to the Wagner Group and the Africa Corps. To what extent are the two the same, and to what extent are they different? Thank you.
Christian, start with this. Georgia. Yes. During the Russia-Georgia war in August 2008, Russia achieved territorial control over 20% of Georgia's internationally recognized land territory, these two regions, Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and that has been the situation ever since. And this certainly complicates Georgia's NATO aspirations. It creates a challenge for Georgia in this situation with unresolved territorial issues. It's difficult to achieve some sort of consensus within the alliance about Georgia and an issue defense guarantees to that country. So the issue of Georgian NATO membership has certainly been put on hold for a very long time, and that seems to be this somewhat similar situation as we see in Ukraine. So, but it's difficult to say. I use the term short-term successes, long-term failures. What may seem as a successful outcome in the short term may, in the long term, turn out to be a pretty spectacular failures, and there are plenty of examples of that in the Black Sea region as well as in the MENA region. Syria is an example that comes to mind, a country where Russia invested and the Soviet Union invested heavily in the Assad regime for more than 50 years, and then suddenly it collapses in 2 weeks, and that was a significant setback for Russia in the MENA region, and similar things may happen in various parts of the Black Sea region.
Well, first of all, I need to say that I speak under the control of my colleague Karen on PMC's issues because she is the real expert. Wagner and the type of subject we're talking about here. What I would say is that there is a major fundamental difference from what I understand between the Wagner Group and the Africa Corps. The Wagner Group is a private military company, but it's been like a kind of a consortium, commercial group working not only on purely the provision of security, but also a much broader range of activities. We talked about information, we're talking about political advice, I think it was mentioned earlier this morning. And most importantly, I think the Kremlin was able to play the Wagner card as one, this plausible deniability issue, saying, well, no, we are not playing, we're not active in Libya, we're not active there because it's not us. It has nothing to do with the Russian government or the Russian state. It's something which is being conducted on the ground for purely commercial purposes by private agents. With the killing of the death of Prigozhin and the absorption of what I understand only part of the Wagner Group into the new Africa Corps, there seems to be something fundamental changing here, is that the Africa Corps is not anymore a private commercial entity, but it's a unit which has been replaced under the direct control of the Ministry of Defense. So this means that the Kremlin cannot anymore use this asset of saying, no, it has nothing to do with us. So it changes fundamentally the perception of local actors, but also the rest of the world, of what is it that Russia is doing there. And the second point is that from my limited knowledge of it, by this reabsorption, reintegration within the defense ministry, it also seems that the broad range of activities that had been conducted through the Wagner Group is to some extent being reduced, which may deprive Moscow from a number of tools that have been precisely very central to this idea of hybrid warfare.
Excellent. We have two questions at the front. First of all, Annie, and then Derek. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you. And yes, Annie Gjerman from NUPI again. So I have a question jumping off of the first presentation, but also going to you, Tina, based on your broader expertise, about the reception of the anti-colonial narrative. So as you presented it, there's sort of two pillars. There's the kind of anti-Western, but then there's also trying to foster Russia's image as an alternative. So I just wondered if, well, my assumption is that it's easier to have credibility with the first one than also the second one. So so I'm wondering about the kind of the challenges or tensions to Russia presenting itself as with the war in Ukraine in mind and the history and the being a great power. So like the kind of tensions or challenges, and maybe there are also differences between countries, differences between regime and people. And lastly, so this is a lot you can pick, but whether China, as I guess the credible or like a third kind of party, has any more credibility on this than Russia, or whether it's also kind of an external great power, whether they are similar issues. Thank you.
You want to go first?
To me, yeah. Okay. Thank you for the question. It gives me the opportunity to add something to the presentation that I made, which was very much focused on the outputs or the results of the research that we conducted in 2023, 2024. At a time, maybe we had this perception that Russia's influence was really growing, and to some extent it seemed like something which was really going forward. And I think the elements that I mentioned as central to Russia's strategy in the region have been increasingly challenged on two issues. I think this idea of the anti-colonial narrative was very easy to play when you're faced on the ground only by, let's say, the West, the US or the Europeans. If you look at how the geopolitical landscape has evolved in the MENA region, you've seen that one of the key patterns of the transformation or change is precisely the emergence of middle powers or regional powers that have started to play a much more important role, both in conflict countries, but also in mediation initiatives and so on and so forth. So the discourse that Russia was able to address to local constituencies and to the West is becoming much more difficult to sell, so to speak, when you are faced on the ground by the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, China, countries that precisely would come from the global south that is perceived as like the kind of constituency that the world majority would cover. So I think it's one of the very central elements that is now creating issues for the success of like the dissemination of this narrative. And I would maybe just add, we can probably develop it further, also this idea that Russia delivers. Look, we are loyal, reliable partner, and when we do something, we do it, and this is something that results in success. After what happened in Syria, but also if you look at the developments in Mali over the past few weeks, this is also something that is creating serious issues to Russia in terms of pushing the narrative of success.
Excellent. We're running out of time. We have a couple of minutes left. I don't know if you wanted to respond, Tina, to this question of Saudi Arabia's anti-colonial...
I don't see Russia having any soft power influence. They had, Russia or Soviet Union had soft power influence with students from Syria, Egypt, Algeria, etc. But that was people who were born in the 50s and 60s. So the new generation, I think, like the middle powers, Turkey is important, but also Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran to some extent. These are important actors, not Russia.
Excellent. Well, we have basically run out of time, and if I took another question, I would be infuriating the organisers. So I better not do that. But I encourage you to speak to the panellists in the break. And let me just take the opportunity to say thank you to all three presenters and wish them the best of luck with their subsequent publications that we all will be following with great enthusiasm. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin.